Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Stories Between Us, where we analyze the psychology of the tragic movies and books we're going to be watching and reading. So today I'm going to be analyzing the book Fault in Our Stars, showing some different scenes and analyzing the key differences and what makes them important. Even though we've already seen some of the scenes in the movies, there's some new scenes, so we're going to be analyzing the psychology of those ones. And with that being said, let's get right into it. So over the course of reading Fault in Our Stars, I've been taking notes. Oops, upside down. I've been taking notes. And it's basically just has some of the different scenes, some of the psychology, and I'm going to be looking at this for reference during this video. On day one, I read a total of 45 minutes and 4 chapters. So the first thing I noticed in chapter 1 is that it was established that Hazel knew who Isaac was. Maybe it's because she had been in a support group earlier and Isaac was there, which I think is the likely chance, but they didn't establish that in the movie, and I really appreciated how they already established that they had some sort of form of relationship with each other, even if it was just acquaintances. Also in the support group with Gus, when they ask him what he fears, he doesn't hesitate to answer oblivion. It's just an immediate answer. As opposed to the movie, he hesitated and thought about it for a moment, which gave me the idea that he was either making it up or that he didn't want to say it at first, or he was trying to think of what to say around Hazel, or, things like that. But with this immediate answer, it shows more of his personality because it shows that he's thought about this. Even if he is the dreamer in the story, he has thought about things like that too. The rest of the chapter was basically the same with the conversation. There was more talk between Gus and Hazel, but it's not really that important for the story. So we're just going to move on to chapter 2. In chapter 2, we see way more of Gus's parents. Actually, chapter 2 and 4, I believe, which I think is important because we didn't really see them much in the movie, which I was a little disappointed by because I wanted to see how his relationship with them is, and how they liked Hazel, or how they worried they were. Like, we saw a bunch of Hazel's parents and how worried they were for Hazel's health, but we didn't see that much about Gus's parents, except for a few scenes throughout the movie. But in the book, I can tell we're getting a lot more from them, which I appreciate because it shows way more about Gus in his relationships and how he handles all of them. In chapter 3, here, let me explain this first. So in the movie, there was a deleted scene with the girl, and she was trying Hazel's cannula. I think that's how you say it. And she was asking about it, asking what's that, and John Green was supposed to be the father in that scene. This scene's actually in the book, which I was really excited to find out. The only difference is, in the movie, it was going to take place in the airport before they left for Amsterdam, but in the book, it took place at the mall. I find that scene really intriguing because it shows the innocence of the child. She doesn't have any health issues at the moment, at least not that we're aware of, and she was curious about something she's never seen before, and Hazel was happy and fine to share that information with her. And I think that was a really important scene to show how Hazel handles other people coming up to her, because who knows how many times people look at her or don't. So maybe this is a normal thing, maybe it's not. But it shows the innocence of life and how much we as people probably don't know, and the fact of you don't know what someone else is going through, but if you ask, you might. Just a thought. Another thing in chapter 3 that I found interesting is that Hazel has other friends. they're not mentioned or shown in the movie, which is like crazy to me, because in the movie they made it seem like she doesn't have a life outside of medical checkups and support group and her usual binge show and books. But she has friends that she goes to the mall with and sees movies and all that. So I was like, that changes like Hazel entirely. Like, it shows that she's not isolating herself like we thought she was. She actively hangs out with people, though of course sometimes she needs time to herself, which she mentioned in the book as well. But I was like, found that interesting because, like I mentioned in the movie review, we all need human connection to live. We're not meant to be isolated. So the fact that they had it in the book and not the movie was a little weird to me. But I digress. Another thing in chapter 3, it's also about Hazel, is that she said she would text him when she finished his book, not the other way around. And I found that interesting because it's not her waiting by the phone like she doesn't have a life. But instead it's her trying something new, hanging out with her friends, going out to the mall, and like living her life. It doesn't show Gus's point of view because the whole book is in Hazel's. So I'm wondering if instead of her waiting by the phone, it's him waiting, or is he too invested in Imperial Affliction? I found that really interesting because, again, it shows that she's not as isolated as the movie points her out to be. And she has a life, she goes places, she does things that they didn't show. So, I felt like that was really important, and I'm kind of disappointed they didn't put that in the movie and they changed that. Alright, after she finished the first book that Augustus gave her, she went on and read the sequels, which means that she was reading new things, which probably made her mom very happy and even less worried because she had been reading Imperial Affliction on loop. So it's like a change for her, and it probably even made her feel a little better and outside of her little bubble. And they even spoke before he finished Imperial Affliction. It wasn't just a wait. So with this being said, so far, I feel like the movie rushed their relationship a little bit. And I wish they had added more than what they did, because in comparison, the movie feels really rushed now. Another thing I saw in chapter 4 is when Hazel went over to Augustus's house after Monica, I believe is her name, broke up with Isaac, and they were just playing the video games. During the game, there was a time where the character Augustus was playing jumped on top of a bomb to save the children from getting killed and the bad guys taking them. Augustus said the phrase, "I saved them," and Hazel responded temporarily, or something like that, which again, going back to the archetypes, shows that Augustus is a dreamer archetype and Hazel is a realist. She knows, sure, you saved them for now, but that's not going to last forever. It's just a temporary save. But Augustus responded back, "All salvation is temporary. I bought them a minute. Maybe that's the minute that buys them an hour, which is the hour that buys them a year. No one's gonna buy them forever, Hazel, Grace, but my life brought them a minute. And that's not nothing." Which, in a way, it shows a lot of his personality. He believes that what he does matters. whether it makes a big impact or a small impact. And that's something that I found a little different from the book compared to the movie. Maybe I'm reading this wrong, but in the book, he believes he has to make a big, huge impact to make a difference at all. He believes he doesn't need this grand gesture to save someone or to make a difference. And that's completely opposite to Gus in the movies, at least if I'm reading into this correctly. Another thing, there's a line that Hazel said, when Isaac, same in the movie, said that I'm losing my sight and she can't handle it, Hazel Grace responded with, well, to be fair, I mean, she probably can't handle it. Neither can you, but she doesn't have to handle it. And you do. Again, shows a lot of realism. Because she knows that there's nothing we can do to stop this from happening, and there's nothing we can do to, I guess, make us not have to handle it. But Monica could get away from it all by breaking up with him and not acknowledging him. So I just found that quote really interesting. Augustus nor Isaac really responded to it, but that line really hit hard because it shows really her entire personality, and it makes a lot more sense having watched the movie and seeing her worry about her parents and what they're gonna do after she's gone. And she's trying to keep them from having to handle so much. She's going to support group to keep them from worrying. She's trying to go out to keep them from worrying. She's, half of what she does is for them and to take some of the load off them, even though she's carrying it all. But in her eyes, they don't have to, and she does. So on the second day, we read for a total of 46 minutes, and we read 3 chapters. So at the beginning of chapter 5, we see that Hazel and Augustus haven't talked for a while, and that she has an appointment for a PET scan, and we see her worrying about it a little bit. We see her hyper focusing on things. Basically, she might notice things that aren't entirely there, or she feels them more strongly than someone who didn't notice them would. She's just kind of focusing on certain things. And she mentions that she doesn't want to worry about it, but she can't help it. And I feel like that's something a lot of us feel every day, and it sucks, but at the same time, it's your mind trying to protect you from worst case scenario, or from getting surprised again, especially if you've been through something like that before. It's just your mind's way of protecting you. So another thing that gets brought up in chapter 5 is Gus's ex-girlfriend. And that's not mentioned at all in the movie. It's not even implied that he had an ex-girlfriend. It's just him. The fact of having an ex-girlfriend who we find out had died, is crazy, honestly, because if you think about it, as we're reading the book or watching the movie, we're thinking, we know how this ends. Hazel's going to die, and so we're worried that, oh no, he's going to lose another girlfriend. He doesn't say much about his ex-girlfriend, Caroline, but he does say that she passed away and that it had been only a year since they were together. And I feel like one that kind of would get in someone's head. If you like someone or you're friends with someone and you find out that their girlfriend had passed away just a year ago, then you would kind of think about it a lot. And Hazel already has so much that she's thinking about with the PET scan, with Gus, with her parents, and that's just another thing that's going to be on her mind now, knowing her personality. And knowing how she feels about him and how she knows he feels about her. She knows that, okay, he likes me, what if it happens again? Another thing that happened in chapter 5 is that Hazel went to visit Isaac in the hospital after his surgery. And that was actually a deleted scene in the movie, and I wish they kept it in because it's good to see connection with another character besides the love interests. It's good to see that Hazel made another friend besides the one or two that she already had before. They had something to connect with in the fact that he had cancer in his eye before the surgery, and she still does. And she knows what it's like to be going through what he does, so does Gus, or somewhat. And like I mentioned before, we are not meant to be isolated. We're not meant to deal with things on our own. That's just not how we were made to function. And Hazel, knowing what it's like to be in the ICU or the hospital all the time, she went to go see him to make sure that he didn't feel alone. They had like little jokes. They talked for a little bit. He talked to her about Monica, and about the nurse, and it was just like a really sweet moment that I wish they would have left in the movie, even if it was just like a small scene of it. After that scene in chapter 5, we find out that Van Houten had messaged Hazel, and her mom came rushing into the room, and Hazel asked her mom if she could go. She was so optimistic and so happy, and then her mom came in and said she wasn't sure that they'd be able to go. Her mom was trying to say, hey, maybe I can talk to Dad about it, maybe we can figure something out, and Hazel said no. Because of the guilt she feels. She remembers a certain memory that they haven't brought up in the book yet. She knows what her parents have done for her and sacrificed and left behind for her, and she doesn't want to make them have to do more than they already do. It says here that it occurred to me that the reason my parents had no money was me. I'd sapped the family savings with Phalanxifer, I think I said that right, co-pays, and Mom couldn't work because she's taken on the full-time professional job of hovering over me. I didn't want to put them even further into debt. So she told her mom, never mind, it's fine, because she felt guilty about all that she made her parents lose. And that's a heavy thing to carry for anyone, let alone a teenager who's already dealing with her illness and who's already dealing with confusion with Gus. With all this that Hazel is thinking about and carrying and dealing with and worrying about, eventually, as happens with everyone, she's gonna explode. She's gonna have a little moment, and it's not gonna be pretty, but sometimes it's what you have to do. Like the quote in Imperial Affliction says, pain demands to be felt. And this is your fellow reminder that if you feel something, do not hesitate to just feel it. Sit with it for a little bit. It's gonna suck, but it's important for growth and for moving on. If you push down your emotions and bottle them up, they're not going to go away. They're just going to be temporarily relieved until one day you get triggered again. So, just your daily reminder to just feel what you have to feel. The rest of chapter 5 is the same, with Gus inviting Hazel over to, for the Make-A-Wish in Amsterdam and all that. So we're just going to move on to chapter 6. So in the movie, we see that Hazel has the episode right away, but it doesn't happen in the book because in the movie it's just for a dramatic effect. So the episode actually happens at the end of chapter 6 and beginning of chapter 7. But during chapter 6, we see a couple of things that I want to bring up. So like I've mentioned before, us as people like to be social or we're supposed to be, at least a little bit. With some people, we're not meant to be by ourselves. So it's good that in chapter 6 we see Hazel talking to her friend Caitlin about Gus. She's not trying to deal with it on her own. She's trying to get advice from her friend, who she knows is very gossipy, and has a boyfriend, or has had many boyfriends. And she's getting advice from her and trying to see what she says about the whole situation, and in a way getting advice and reassurance. And then we see where the spiraling kind of begins with her looking up Caroline, Gus's ex-girlfriend, of which we find out that she died from brain cancer. And then she finds the page with all the condolences and her friends saying how much they miss her and how much they wish she was there. And it just kind of sends Hazel into a spiral, as I predicted, because she doesn't want to do that to Gus again. She doesn't want to make him go through losing someone else, because that's her whole thing. She wants to prevent as many people from getting hurt as she can, and to do that, she needs to isolate herself. She needs to kind of step back and create boundaries with Gus to make sure that he doesn't get attached to her the way he did with Caroline. And now after she looks up Caroline Mathers and she goes to the dinner table, she's focusing on the pain in her shoulder and the headache she's beginning to get, and she's worrying and panicking about it, and trying to hide it from her parents, who noticed the wave of anxiety going through her. If you remember in the movie, Hazel tells Gus that she's a grenade and that she's trying to prevent casualties. But in the book, she tells her parents this. And she says, I'm like a grenade, Mom. I'm a grenade, and at some point I'm going to blow up, and I would like to minimize the casualties, okay? And she says, I just want to stay away from people and read books and think and be with you guys, because there's nothing I can do about hurting you because you're too invested. Which, like I've been saying, she carries so much, including her own parents' worry. She thinks it's her responsibility to take care of them and to make sure that they're okay. But she knows she can't, because they're her parents. They're already invested, so she's constantly thinking about that. She's constantly thinking about who she's gonna leave behind when she dies, and no one should have to carry. So after she went up to her room, after having a little conversation with her parents, she thinks to herself that to be with him was to hurt him, inevitably. And that's what I felt as he reached for me. I felt as though I was committing an act of violence against him, because I was. So then she decided to text him, set the boundary of, hey, let's just be friends. He took it fine. He was just probably confused, honestly, because if it came out of nowhere and the person you liked said, hey, just be friends, don't touch me, don't do any of that stuff, you'd probably be confused too. But he still doesn't stop trying to pursue her even afterwards, because he knows how he feels, and even if she's either in denial of it or doesn't want to feel it, he knows that how she feels, or he thinks he knows how she feels, and he's going to keep trying. So chapter 7 shows the episode that she had, and it describes it more as a searing pain in her head as opposed to water filling up in her lungs. And I feel like that's important, because I don't know for a fact, but I imagine that that's what it would feel like. Deprived oxygen to your brain would give you headaches. The deprived oxygen would cause pain in your body in general. It wouldn't actually feel like, or you wouldn't know that your lungs are filling up with water until they're already drowning. So I felt like that was a very important detail to put in here. It was more of a description than a telling. You were showing, John Green showed the audience what was happening as opposed to just telling them what was happening. The rest of chapter 7 isn't really too important. Her parents saw her and they're like, it's just another thing. It's a thing that we can deal with. And she didn't see anyone except for her parents throughout the entire time. On the third day, we read for a total of 47 minutes and 2 chapters, chapters 8 and 9. So in chapter 8, we see that that one scene that was in the movie that Hazel saw and heard what her mom said with, I'm not going to be a mom anymore. And it's the core and it's the little seed that caused everything that she worries about her parents. She heard that when she was so young, and it just stuck with her and gutted her for the rest of her life, knowing what her mom said, and now she's scared to leave them, not just for herself, but for her mom. She doesn't want her mom to feel like she doesn't have a life without her, because her mom has dedicated her entire life to her. And if she leaves, she doesn't know what her mom or dad are going to do. What I've noticed a lot about Hazel is that, yes, she's a realist, but she also never really thinks about herself. She always thinks about, how is this going to affect Gus? How is this going to affect my parents? How is Gus going to react? Like, she never thinks about how it's affecting her. She only thinks about how it's affecting other people. Another little detail that I noticed in chapter 8 is with the BiPAP machine. I think I might have said that right. It makes so much noise, like a low grumbling loud noise, that she pretends that it's a dragon sleeping next to her that's breathing in time with her. And that may not seem like an important detail to most people. They would just read it and think that's cute. But I think it honestly shows how young Hazel still is. She is 16 and she's dealing with all this, and she's using her imagination to cope with it. And she's using it to help her sleep, and usually that machine might keep someone up, but she uses her imagination, she uses fantasy as an escape to help her sleep with it. Sometimes having these coping mechanisms can help you be lighter on yourself and see it in a different way that doesn't hurt as much. And that can be a really helpful thing for the mind and for yourself. And it could even help you physically, because your mind is focused on something else as opposed to what you're actually feeling physically. Another thing I liked that they had in the book was that the swing set of tears, she called Augustus and they talked for a little bit, and then he says, I demand to see this swing set of tears immediately. And in the book, they decided to sell it to someone. They decided to give it away, give it a loving home. And someone actually got back to them because Hazel wasn't using it anymore. This is the moment where Augustus reveals that he likes Hazel. Literally not even a paragraph later is when Hazel thinks to herself, I fell asleep the way you fall in love, slowly and then all at once. Moving on to chapter 9, the beginning isn't really too important. It's more of just like another support group. And then she goes over to Isaac's house, which I want to talk about a little bit. Basically, all of chapter 9 is just her sitting down playing a game with Isaac, which I found that chapter quite intriguing and fascinating. Most of the chapter was just them playing video games, and like at the end they talked about Gus and Monica, and I felt like it was good for Hazel to hang out with someone other than Augustus, considering the stress and confusion she feels about him and the complications that they have now with her worries and stuff. But yeah, I found the video game aspect really interesting because I wondered how blind people play video games, or if they can. And I like that accessibility that John Green put in the book, showing that aspect of Isaac's life. I found that really interesting. So on the fourth day, we read for 46 minutes, and we read 2 chapters, chapters 10 and 11. So chapter 11 doesn't have too much, at the beginning at least, but then they go over to Augustus's house to pick him up to drive to the airport, and they hear someone crying, and they hear Augustus yelling, and the way Hazel describes it is a twisted version of Gus's voice yells that, it's his life and he can do what he wants with it, basically. He's like, because it's my life, Mom, it belongs to me. And then, Hazel's mom points her back towards the car, and they just wait for him to come out again. This, I believe it may be a bit of foreshadowing, and if you don't know what that is, it's basically a literary device used to plant subtle hints or warnings about future plot developments, building anticipation and tension, or for negative narrative cohesion. And I feel like this was foreshadowing, along with something else that comes up when he's at the airport and disappears for a little bit. And then we move on to the airplane scenes. I love the little scenes and the moments that they had on the plane, Hazel and Augustus, and the things they talked about. At one point on the trip, this kind of shows Hazel as the realist archetype. She asks, how many people do you think have ever died? Not just in the fictional movie they were watching, but in actual life, and Gus had an answer. Which showed a little bit of the side of him that we don't see very often. He looked into it at one point, and he was wondering about if everyone could be remembered, and if there would be enough people that are living to remember all the dead ones. And that's like a really deep topic to A, talk about, but 2, to even think about looking into. And then not too soon later, Augustus straight up told Hazel that he is in love with her. And he says the quote that he says in the restaurant in the movie. So before they even reached Amsterdam, he confessed his love to her. And I feel like that might have something to do with pacing. Like I've been saying throughout this video, I feel like the pacing of the movie was much quicker than the pacing in the book. And this time, he said I love you before it happened in the movie, and I feel like that was intentional. They had seemingly talked more and hung out with each other more and shared more things with each other in the book than they did in the movie. And so that gives him the opportunity, and it gives him the confidence to say it sooner than he did in the movie. I absolutely still love the monologue he says when he tells Hazel he loves her, because it's acknowledging everything that she believes to be true, honestly. It says, I know that love is just a shout into the void, and that oblivion is inevitable, and that we're all doomed, and there will come a day when all our label has been returned to dust, and I know the sun will swallow the only earth we ever have, and I am in love with you. And it's just, he knows how she feels about life. He knows how her viewpoint is, and he loves her for it, and he acknowledges it when confessing his love. He's not just ignoring her feelings or saying that her beliefs or her viewpoint is weird and dumb. He's actively noticing it and loving her for it. He hopes that one day she can learn and realize that he does not mind if he gets hurt by her, or if something happens to either of them, because he loves her, and that's all that matters to him. Chapter 11 has a lot of things and a lot of quotes that I really like. One of them being the one said by the driver that took him to the hotel. And he said, some tourists think that Amsterdam is the city of sin, but in truth it's the city of freedom. and in freedom most people find sin. And I found that quote really interesting and intriguing because that is honestly true. I'm religious, and I feel like that is a really good quote to portray life in general. Like, when you're free and we're down here, we have freedom. We can relatively do what we want and say what we want, but that doesn't mean what we say and do isn't a sin. But since we have that freedom, it's more likely that we will have sin. And so, since Amsterdam is the city of that, most people find sin in this place because it is free. You're free. When Gus and Hazel made it to the restaurant, I love to point out that Gus remembers the little things. He remembered that Hazel was vegetarian when she only told him that once, and it was on the very first day they met. I don't know how long it's been since that moment, but I do know that that is a very important detail, and it probably, honestly, it shows that that meant something to Hazel, and it could make her connection with him grow and make her realize that she does still love him and that she can't deny it much longer. They still had the same conversation at dinner that they did in the movie about angels and the afterlife and if he believes in heaven and God. And the only difference in the book is that the way Gus worded it made Hazel feel really upset. She said, it's just really mean of you to say that the only lives that matter are the ones that lived for something or died for something. That's a really mean thing to say to me. And I feel like it was more than just what he said, because we saw in the video game that he jumped on top of the grenade and as the character to save the kids, even a few minutes. That's just what Gus believes. He believes that if you do this, it could lead to something greater, and then you will leave an impact. And Hazel thinks that you don't need all that in order to live an impactful life. You don't need a grand gesture or a big moment. You just have to impact those around you. After the dinner, we find that Hazel asked about Caroline, Gus's ex-girlfriend, and he told her everything that she wanted to know. He told her how their relationship started, how it ended, and the way he explained it, he was saying that you can't exactly break up with a girl with a brain tumor. That's just not something you can do, which gives me the idea that he didn't really love her. Him being with her was more like a thing that he felt like he needed to do. Even though she was mean to him, she teased him about his leg, but he didn't know if that was actually her personality or if that was her, and that can cause a lot of confusion and heartache for someone, whether you love them or you're just friends with them. Either way, you know the person, yet he doesn't. He didn't know her because he didn't know how she was before any of that happened. Also, I'm going to go back to the cigarette metaphor for a second. I notice in the book that anytime he gets nervous or anxious or unsure, uncertain, anything along those lines, he grabs one of the cigarettes and he puts it in his mouth. He did it at the airplane because he's never been on one before. He didn't know how he'd like it. He did it when they're talking about Caroline. He did it while talking to Hazel. It's like his confidence booster. It gives him something to make him look cool in a way, and make him feel more confident with what he's saying or doing. This can be a coping mechanism. Maybe for some people they wear a necklace every day and they grab it if they need some confidence. Think about Stranger Things, for example. Holly had that necklace that Mike gave her in the last season, and she held on to it and grabbed it. whenever she felt scared or needed a little boost of bravery. The cigarettes for Augustus does the same thing. It gives him a boost and it makes him feel a little bit better about what he's doing or saying. And that's a very good and maybe important for some people coping mechanism. And it can really help if you have the right tool with you. Also, they bring up again the fact that he was staring at Hazel Grace in the support group. And I feel like that's why they should have put it in the movie as well, because the fact that he thought that Hazel was Caroline's ghost for a while, he was confused and scared and just staring at her. In the movie, it was for a completely different reason. And I wish they would have probably put Caroline in the movie to make that clear, unless they were just entirely changing the reason. Because in the book it says, just to be clear, when I thought I saw Caroline Mather's ghost in support group, I was not entirely happy. I was staring, but I wasn't yearning, if you know what I mean. And then he pulled the pack out of his pocket and placed the cigarette back in. And yeah, that just entirely changes the meaning of their very first meeting. And it turned into this beautiful love journey and adventure for them, just because something from his past. Someone from his past. And that's a really important detail that they should not have left out in the movie, considering that the whole reason they met was because of Caroline and because he thought he saw her. It just occurred to me that this has kind of reminded me of Vampire Diaries. The whole reason Stefan and Damon talked to Elena was because she was a reincarnation of Catherine. Chapter 12 was a really long chapter. So chapter 12 is when they meet Van Houten, and he doesn't answer any of their questions. He's basically avoiding it. Hazel gets upset, Gus gets angry, and basically it just shows that Van Houten isn't either the same person he used to be, or that he's not a good person. Hazel seemed a little bit more patient in the book than she did in the movie. She, in the book, explained that she wasn't mad, she just wanted answers. So either she was avoiding it, or she wasn't. Anyways, after this whole Van Houten fiasco, we see that the assistant quit, and I don't believe that she quit in the movie, which I found interesting and good for her, because yeah, don't stay with someone who treats you that poorly anyways. So after this whole fiasco, they went to the Anne Frank house with the assistant, and it was like the stairs scene, of course. It seemed in the movie they made it longer as opposed to the book, and instead of Hazel wanting to carry her own oxygen tank and do it herself, she allowed the assistant to help her and for Gus to help her out and stuff. Which I think is a little bit of a change of her personality. Because in the book it's like I can ask for help and I can accept it as well, but in the movie it seemed like she didn't want anyone's help. She just wanted to do things on her own because that's not entirely what she's used to. Though in the movie it seems that she's used to that. But in the book she seems to be asking and receiving and accepting a lot more help. Also, during the kissing scene in the Anne Frank house, instead of Anne Frank talking like it was in the movie, her father, Otto Frank, was speaking instead, his little monologue. He was saying things about Anne Frank, how like after he read her diary and such, he was saying, "You're quite a different Anne. I had known as my daughter, and I didn't realize she had this many deep thoughts." And he was saying that I've come to terms that most parents don't know their children, which I think is very interesting that they chose to have Otto Frank's monologue in the book, but then in the movie they chose Anne Frank's. Um, and I feel like the Anne Frank monologue connects more to Hazel than Otto's, but Otto would connect more to her parents, of which she obviously thinks a lot about and puts them into the equation every single time she makes a decision. Alright, after the Anne Frank house, they go back to, I think, Augustus's room. Um, you know, but they showed some foreshadowing about what was happening with Augustus again, like before we had the arguing with his parents. But now they have that, he pushed the mirror door open. When it was half opened, he winced in pain and lost his grip on the door for a second. And his cover up was, yeah, the door's just heavy. And he's just out of shape. But later on, we see the real reason why that door was hard to open, because I'm not going to say it yet. I feel like in the movie they didn't give us a lot of foreshadowing for Augustus's diagnosis, because they wanted us to be surprised by it and they wanted us to be caught off guard, which it worked. As opposed to already being worried or thinking something's going on and then finding out, oh, that's why. So I feel like the movie had like a bigger gut punch than the book did in that sense. Not saying that the book didn't completely destroy me. The only chapter I read for day 4, because it was so long, I read for a total of 28 minutes and it was only that chapter. Alright, on day, was it 5 now? We read for a total of 36 minutes and we read 7 chapters. So at the beginning of chapter 13, we see that they're telling Hazel's mom the story about Van Houten and all that. And there's the quote that they use at the beginning of the movie, which is, I believe we have a choice in this world on how to tell sad stories. And I like how they're picking things from throughout the book for that opening monologue, since we don't get the entirety of that in the book. Afterwards, we see Hazel's mom telling Gus and Hazel that they should talk, which shows that she knows something, and I'm kind of curious, or I was curious about how she found out. But then we find out that Gus went in for a PET scan, and as he described it, it lit up like a Christmas tree, which is humor, trying to use it as a coping mechanism to make things seem lighter and to try to, I guess, see the bright side, or to make it feel less hard if you make a joke about it. A lot of us use humor as a coping mechanism. Me, myself, do it a lot. I feel like it's really good that they mention that in here. Even if it's not directly, they show that Gus uses humor a lot to hide how he's feeling, or to make it just seem lighter and easier to deal with. There was a time before he talked to Hazel about what was going on, and they were just looking at the petals in the water. They were looking at the atmosphere of Amsterdam and just sightseeing, I guess. And he says, I could look at this all day, but we should go to the hotel. And she asked, do we have time? And he smiled sadly and said, if only. And that's also foreshadowing for what he's about to say. And it makes a lot more sense as we read the book, and when he confesses to her that he once again has cancer and it's worse this time. And this is the moment that Hazel realizes that she now understands what she was trying to do, because Augustus did basically the same thing, and she realizes, for like a better term, how crazy it is to do something like isolate yourself and push people away. She describes it, she says, "Only now that I've loved a grenade did I understand the foolishness of trying to save others from my own impending fragmentation. I couldn't unlove Augustus Waters, and I didn't want to." And like I said, this is the moment she realizes that's what I've been trying to do this whole time, and there's no point to it because they're still going to care about me. It's not going to protect them like I think it is. Because she saw how she reacted just now, and it's not going to change for anyone else. Not her parents. If she was gone before Gus was, he would still be heartbroken. So she realizes that it was kind of not going to work the way she thought it would, and that there's no point to doing that. And that's kind of the growth of the realist. You learn to live your life and to be happy even though there are bad things going on, and even though you know you will hurt someone, that it's still worth it to know these people and be with these people as long as you can. The rest of day 5 kind of blurred together a little bit. It's chapters 14 through 19 were kind of somewhat the same, except for one very important scene, and I will dig deep into that once we get there. So these chapters are mostly just little scenes with Augustus and how he was dealing with his diagnosis and how his family was dealing with it. And I like how they showed more of his family and how they came over to support him and to help his parents and all that, and they didn't show that in the movie, and I wish they did. Chapter 14 specifically, we have when Isaac, Hazel, and Gus went to go egg Monica's house. That's all basically the same. At the end of that chapter, we have Hazel taking a picture of Gus and Isaac in front of the house that was just egged. And then the little line, the very last line of that chapter says, "And that was the last picture I took of Gus." It's the book's way of saying, hey, this was one of those moments that is important because it is a landmark in Hazel's story and Gus's story. In chapter 18, they have the scene where Gus is at the gas station and his G-tube's infected, so he calls Hazel for help, but she ends up having to call 911. That scene is basically the same except for one part. This was actually a deleted scene from the movie. We call it the red wheelbarrow scene, where she is trying to distract Gus and keep him occupied before the ambulance gets here, except in the movie it was going to be in the ambulance. Basically, she's telling him this poetry, I believe it's called the red wheelbarrow, and it's just like a very heartfelt and sincere scene. And considering that throughout the book previously they've been talking about poetry, he's been wanting her to read him something. Part of the Imperial Affliction has poetry, I believe. It's a very heartfelt and important scene that not only me but a lot of other people wish they kept in. I feel like I know why they cut it out, because I didn't want to elongate that scene, but at the same time it was such a meaningful moment. They also probably cut it out because they didn't put the poetry references or anything previously in the movie, so they didn't feel like it would have the same impact that it would if they put it in the movie more. Anyways, the chapters goes on. Gus is at home and stuff. They have, again, the little scenes with Gus and his family. In chapter 19, they have the reference of the last good day, and how you don't know how it's going to be your last day or when it's going to be your last day. And that line, I feel like, is very important because it's so real and deep and truthful. It also shows how impulsive and how crazy life can get because you don't know when something's going to happen. You don't know when your life's going to change. You don't know, like, any of that. The last good day could be a reference for anything, but in this book it's obviously referring to your last day where you feel okay and you feel good. And for Augustus, that was the day of their pre-funeral. So before she left for the pre-funeral, her parents had an argument, but not the same one that she had in the movie. This one was more about her parents feeling like they never see her anymore since she's out with Gus or with her family, or his family, I mean. And she says some things she doesn't entirely mean, but at the same time that she's maybe been keeping tucked in into herself, because we see that her parents are always there for her, which isn't a bad thing. But sometimes it can be overwhelming for a kid or a teenager who just wants to be able to live their life, and parents hovering over them can sometimes feel frustrating. After this argument, they'd have the pre-funeral that is all basically the same, with Hazel's eulogy and Isaac's eulogy. Just a bittersweet moment knowing what is to come, and it gives us a little sense of peace before the pin drops. The only difference is that it took place in the support group area instead of an actual church area like it was in the movie, which I felt like also had a more meaningful symbolism, because that's where they met, that's where they saw each other, and where they started their first date. So I feel like that was a little more meaningful for their story. After Hazel got the news that Augustus had died, she went on social media, I think a couple days after. The rest of it was the same, and she saw all the comments about people saying sorry for your loss, not to her, just in general, how much they're gonna miss Gus, how much they loved Gus, and how great of a person he was. And one quote that she mentioned in that chapter during that time was, "You get all these friends just when you don't need friends anymore." It was a lot like when she went to look at Augustus's ex-girlfriend's comments, except this time it was more meaningful and it was more hurtful for her, because she knew Gus and she was almost certain that half these people haven't talked to him in years, or they never even met him. Chapter 22 is Gus's funeral. A lot of the scenes in the rest of these chapters didn't really happen in the movies, or it wasn't entirely the same. For example, in, like I said, chapter 22, there was the funeral, but it was inside an actual church, and she went up to his coffin and talked to him while it was open. She gave him the cigarettes. She gave him the box of cigarettes and said, "It's okay, you can light them. I won't mind." And I thought that was really cute. For their first meeting, where she had a big problem with him having a cigarette, thinking that he was gonna light it. So it was just like a cute little throwback to that moment that I appreciated. And then we see Van Houten had come to the funeral, except he didn't have the letter with him, and I'm gonna explain that further later on once they talk a little bit. And she was like just caught off guard, not necessarily mad nor frustrated that he was there in the first place, but she was more just confused and shocked. I like this quote that's in chapter 22 as well. It says, like all innumerable dead, he'd once and for all been demoted from haunted to haunter. And I feel like that's very important, because that's one of the archetypes, haunted. And if he goes on to be the haunter, then that means the person that he's haunting is his parents, the main character, anyone who is in his life that is now hurt and grieving from the loss. Beforehand, he was haunted by everything he couldn't do and everything that he had maybe previously lost. They had a little conversation inside the car, her and Van Houten, and she wasn't mad that he was there, like I said before. Even now, when they were having the conversation and he was trying to tell her something important, she just didn't want to hear it, per se. Like, she was tired, she didn't want to be there anymore, as she had explained to her parents before, and she just wanted to go home. In chapter 23, we have more scenes with Isaac, which I really appreciate. This was the moment where he told Hazel about the letter. And since Van Houten didn't give it to her, I was confused when I first read this, because she hadn't received it, so she can't, like, go to the car and retrieve it and read it again. So I was wondering where the letter was. So then she goes to drive to Augustus's house to see if maybe something was in his computer, his mail, to that he maybe sent to someone, or that it was just a draft. And she finds Van Houten in her car again. And this is the moment that reveals more of Van Houten. He is trying to tell her something again, and he's apologizing over and over, and she just wants him to leave. She just wants him to get out because she doesn't want to deal with this right now. But then we see Van Houten actually get a little emotional, and she realizes that, yeah, he actually has lost someone. He's not just a writer that wrote about some character in a book. He actually lost someone, and it made her rethink things a little bit. So then he asked him questions about his daughter, who had died from leukemia at 8, I believe, and they just kind of had like a small conversation about it. This conversation that she had with Van Houten really shows a different side of him. It shows a more human version of him that's not yelling and not trying to say mean things to them just to get them out of his house because he was hurting. He was actually telling her things about his life, about his daughter, and what was happening. She told him that he should get his life together, write another book, and do what he's good at, because not many people have that opportunity. So she made it to Gus's house, and she goes back down to the basement and holds on to his sheets while looking for the notebook or the computer or anything that might be a clue to how to find this letter that he wrote. And his parents told her that they would call her if they found anything, but they doubted that they would. So in the next chapter, we find out that they did find something, but it had 2 pages ripped out of it. So in the next chapter, she goes to support group, and they have the usual thing with Patrick and her speaking, except Gus wasn't there. And it really shows his absence. And these are the chapters that show the haunted archetype. I explained it a little bit in my archetype video, but basically it's the person, it's a type of person that you are after you lose somebody. You go on adventures, you find something, and you try to move on while grieving. Her goal is to just find that letter and to try to find a way to keep Gus with her for as long as she can, because he's gone. After support group, she comes home, and it's the scene with her mother and Hazel saying that she's not going to be a mom anymore, and there's nothing she can do about it, and she's going to die. And this whole scene that happened in the movie, except it's so much more impactful because it's after Augustus's death. Also, another thing I'd like to note in this is that her mother remembers saying that the second it comes out of Hazel's mouth, saying that you're not going to be a mother anymore. Hazel's mom is like, "Oh my gosh, you heard that," and she just apologized. It changes it so much, because the fact that her mom remembered exactly what she said, and she didn't even, it didn't seem that apparent that she remembered until Hazel reminded her when she said it. But in the book, she immediately knew what she was talking about. So after that conversation, we see that Hazel's mom was going to classes to become what Hazel described as a Patrick, which is basically just like a social worker helping families who are going through the same thing that they did. And the rest of the night went off pretty normal. They were just watching TV and joking and, trying to have as normal of a life that they can have. And then there's the next chapter, which is the last chapter. Oh my gosh, I can't believe we had made it that far so quickly. The first thing is that Caitlin is back, which is Hazel's friend, and we hadn't seen her through more than half the book. We only saw her at the beginning and stuff. So I really like how she had a friend to be there with her in a way, and she wasn't by herself doing this. Of course, she had her parents, but it's a little different to have friends who are there for you. So, yeah. And then during this phone call, Caitlin gives Hazel the idea that maybe Gus sent the letters to Van Houten for help or something. And so she messaged the assistant, and the assistant went to the house right away. And I kind of love this version of it because it's not that she had to work to get these letters, it's that she had to process a couple things and have a few conversations in order to get the letter, and it might have healed her more than maybe she already was. Anyway, she sent this email, and the assistant responded saying she was going to go to the house and that she was going to find this letter, or try to. And then the next scene is just Hazel and her parents, and I love how they have more scenes with them, peaceful scenes with them, because we don't see them in the movie in the same ways that we do in the book. We see a more connection between them in more peaceful moments of them just talking and being there for each other during the hard time, and them being there for Hazel through Augustus's death. And then after they go back home, Hazel finds an email from the assistant, and it's the letters. She told them what happened, and she found the letters and emailed them to her, and she was going to mail them to her address. And that's the same letter that they show in the movie, except for a few parts that I'm not going to say. But yeah, it's the only difference between the letters, that they didn't say the okay at the end, which I wish they did, but it's okay because it's still just as beautiful. And that's the end of Fault in Our Stars and all the notes that I had written in my little book. A few more things I'd like to mention before I end this video. These are just my personal opinions. I like the redemption for Van Houten, though it's not like a full redemption arc. It shows the humanity of him and his story more, and why he does the way why he thinks and does things that he does. Not that it excuses all the things that he said, but it still explains him a little more and puts him in a certain light that maybe we can understand. I also like the fact in the movie that she was reading the physical note more as opposed to just reading the email. But I do understand that that was kind of not possible for the storyline and the way that it was going in the book. And also, I love more of the connection with the family and friends of both Hazel and Augustus, and the scenes that they had together throughout the story that weren't always included in the movie, and even with Isaac. The last thing I'd like to bring up is that the aftermath of Augustus's death, with the haunted archetype, Hazel being the haunted for the most part. Afterwards, all she was trying to do was find this letter so that she can have a piece of Gus with her. And that is very important because that's often what the haunted archetype tries to do. And like I mentioned in my archetype video, characters aren't just one archetype. They can be a realist and a haunted, like Hazel is. Anyways, that is going to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed analyzing Fault in Our Stars with me, the book. Next movie we're doing is Midnight Sun, and the next book we're doing is gonna come up in a video soon, and I hope you enjoy that as well. For now, I will see you next time. Bye!